So there's no magic to this, but I thought I'd cover some basics in terms of overall health and well-being, which is why you're here and what we want to talk about. Am I moving around too much, Stephanie? That's my habit. I should have worn cement shoes. So let's start with some basic stuff. And the basics I would maybe put into 3 categories. I'm sorry, I'm just going to wander around. Okay, you should have put some tape down so I can know how far I can go. Diet, physical activity, don't like to call it exercise, like move the body. And unfortunately, we've had a whole year of not moving the body very much. And then a bit about vitamins and supplements, because I know lots of you take those and have questions about those. So quick show of hands, who takes a vitamin or supplement of some kind? Whole bunch of you. And that's perfectly fine, but we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm starting to wander off again. I'm sorry. So let's start with sort of the diet thing. Now, diet is interesting because as you get older, it might not be quite as critical to you as it is a 30 or 40-year-old. So I'm not going to go over the fruits and vegetables. I think everyone knows the basics. In terms of, in general, more fiber, more roughage is good. Simple carbohydrates are not good, right? That's everything that's on the back table. So this is the health and wellness talk, and all the things on the back table are no good. And there have been more studies now. So for example, what are carbohydrates? They're complex sugars that are bound together. Simple carbohydrates are sugars, fructose, glucose, that kind of stuff. Complex carbohydrates, the most complex, are fiber, which is not broken down by your body. So fiber is generally thought to be healthy. It's generally not absorbed, not digested. It goes through the gastrointestinal system. It might mop up some free radicals. It definitely increases bulk, and it's a good thing. If you look at people's diet and you only compare the quantity of simple carbohydrates, that is, how much sort of sweetened or packaged things people eat, versus groups of people who tend to eat more of the healthy stuff, right? The fruits and vegetables and those kind of things. The simple carb folks, and it's not a huge difference. I think there's a 20% difference between the two intakes. The people who had the simple carbohydrate diet or more simple carbohydrates, and the other way to think of that too is probably more fast food, right? So that's going to be a little bit more of the McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, all the fast foods. Those people have 20 to 30% more cardiovascular disease and more stroke. So there's something associated with simple carbs is not good. Now, all of us and all of you have been taught and trained that fats are really bad, right? You don't want to have a high fat anything. If you eat, it should be low fat. And then the other part of fat is the saturated versus the unsaturated. So just to clarify, the whole fat thing started in the 1970s. So there were some congressional testimony provided about health of adults in America, and it was becoming evident that heart disease was becoming more prominent. And so it's either 11 westernized countries were studied. It got whittled down to then maybe 4 or 5 westernized countries, including the United States, in which there appeared to be an association between dietary fat intake and cardiovascular outcomes. But it didn't hold for the other countries. So for some reason, they were dropped out of the study. But as a consequence of that, a recommendation came that we needed to reduce the amount of fat in food. So starting in the 70s, fat content in food went down. Now, has anyone ever tried to drink or taste pure amino acids? So if you eat protein are amino acids. They get broken down in your intestine into amino acids, which are the building blocks of your body. But has anyone ever tried like amino acid syrup or other stuff like that? No, you never had a chance? Did anyone ever drink the first version of Ensure or Boost? Sustacal, I think, came later. Anyone ever tried the really early versions of those protein supplements? No? So you might not know that pure protein or pure amino acids are horrible. They don't taste good at all. They are super nasty. Now again, Ensure and some of these other high-calorie supplements were originally designed for feeding by tube. So you got a tube in the belly, we're going to pour it down the tube. You're not tasting anything, so why not just give the pure elements? So the two big components that make food sort of tasty and good and kind of feel nice in the mouth are fat. And what else is left? Sugar, carbohydrates. So I just told you that from the 70s on, we were going to reduce fat intake in food. So something had to substitute for the reduction in fat, which made food taste good, and it wasn't going to be protein. So the other component then were carbohydrates. And so just to summarize, it turns out that the types of carbohydrates that people enjoy, the goodies, tend not to be a very good substitute for fat. And in the long run, we might have maybe gotten a small reduction in heart disease and stroke, less than would be expected otherwise, because simple carbs are not so good for your body either. It's easier, the other thing, so here's the other dilemma with simple carbs is, so what happens if you eat protein or fat, you don't really get very much of an insulin response. So insulin levels stay low. They tend to, if you've had an omelet in the morning, you kind of know it's going to hold you over till lunchtime. You don't get hungry. If you eat simple carbs and you look at what happens in terms of glucose and insulin, obviously glucose goes up, insulin levels go up too, because if you can't, you're not going to utilize all the glucose at once. You're going to store some of it. And insulin causes glucose storage. When sugar gets stored, what's it get converted into? Fat. And when insulin is in circulation, it blocks the fat from being mobilized. So what happens, and they've done some interesting studies in younger college kids, where you feed them breakfast cereal, and then you monitor insulin and glucose levels, and then you give them another breakfast cereal. You ask them how hungry they are, and you track this stuff. And it turns out breakfast cereal and simple carb type of stuff, you get higher insulin levels. These people are also hungrier, and not only are they hungrier all the time, but they tend to want more carbs sooner than that next meal. And every time you have a carb meal, you're going to release insulin, you're going to block fat release, you're going to put more sugar into fat, and it starts a cycle of just slow weight gain over time. Now, the epidemiologists and biostats people have argued for a long time about why is our country becoming so heavy. It's to some extent this carb issue. To some extent, it's also that we're not as active as we used to be. If you look at workplace energy expenditure, it's gone down quite a bit. And if you look at leisure time energy expenditure, it's gone down a bit too. So those two things in combination are not ideal. So the bottom line in terms of the diet is, particularly at your age, everything in moderation. So you can have cake, you can have ice cream, you got to have some fun, right? That's a quality of life issue. But just be careful of if you're in a habit to snack on things, particularly if they're packaged, those are the ones that are going to get you in trouble over time. Again, having some crackers or cookie here and there, ice cream is not a big deal. But if it's many times in a row, you're going to get in trouble. Now, those of you who've been under my care on Sanders know that my spiel is completely different. Because on Sanders, our rehab unit, you're coming out of the hospital, you haven't been eating well. Some of my folks have already been losing weight before the hospitalization. Does anyone know what I tell them? Eat whatever goes down the hatch, right? It could be donuts, ice cream, cookies, all that stuff, because we need calories to get going, get things going. So, but we're talking about longer term health and wellness. So I'm going to stop right there in terms of diet and ask, or try and answer any questions that you might have as it relates to diet, food, intake, that kind of stuff. Yeah?
I've for a long time.
Let me get you a microphone.
most of my adult life, I've followed a high-protein, low-carb
Mm-hmm.
diet. And I've avoided lots of things. For example, don't typically eat breads. Recently, I have started adding bread. And I noticed the variety of breads. And
Yeah.
of course, I will go to Whole Foods or one,
Yeah.
something similar.
Yes.
But recently, I was attracted to Dave's Good Seed, Dave's Power Seed breads, and whatever. And of course, you read the labels; they're very attractive. But I have no idea whether it means anything beneficial or not. I do know it tastes good,
Yes.
which makes me think it might not be good.
Yeah.
So could you comment on?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and that's a component really I neglected here that I wanted to address, is a question about bread. So if you're running a restaurant and you want people to buy as much food as possible and would like to have the biggest ticket sales at the end of that meal, why would you bring that person or that family a basket of bread before they order anything? Because for the non-whole grain breads, that basically, as soon as it gets to your belly, goes instantly to sugar. And now we've done what I talked about just a few minutes ago with the breakfast cereal, is you get a big spike in sugar and a big spike in insulin, and that stimulates your appetite. So the restaurant people already know, because if it was a matter of how much food can you put in the stomach, you wouldn't want to pre-fill it with a bunch of bread, right? But it turns out that you're going to have more appetite and you can consume more. So that's where the bread comes in. Now, so grains are good, but the whole issue again is whole grains. The less processed, the better. So the old rule of thumb, if it's white, stay away, white bread, white flour. And white flour processed or non-whole grain breads, they're tasty, right? They taste good. And for a dinner out or a celebration, it's perfectly fine, but just be careful. So yeah, I'm not familiar with the Dave's brand, but if that's a whole grain wheat or a whole grain rye, telling you using the whole grain, those are better. It's preferable, mainly because the more work it takes your digestive system to do, the less processed and refined it is, and the less taxing it is on your body in terms of glucose, insulin, all that other stuff. That was a great lead-in.
Good answer.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Anything else on diet? And there'll still be time for questions as well. Okay, so now let's talk about physical activity, sort of one of my favorite things. So I always say, walk a day keeps the doctor away, because the human body was really meant to move. That was for our entire existence on this planet. We had to move, otherwise you wouldn't survive. Now, unfortunately for Natalie and I, we have seen a year's worth of consequence of people being sequestered in the apartment, reduction in activity, wellness center being closed for a while, and those things. And I would tell you, though we were fortunate that we didn't have much COVID at all, the consequences of not moving your body as much as you used to are huge. More pneumonias, more falls in coordination, more weight loss, muscle loss, hip fractures, more depression. And honestly, even though we've had more activity available, I would say everyone is still pulling out of this. That was a big, big change for everyone. And we have folks who tell us, I walk in the apartment. This is when we're like, don't go out very much. We'll bring you the meals. Walking in the apartment is just not the same as getting outside and walking. So moving the body is really important. And walking is sufficient. And of the exercise components, just to get to the chase, the most important factor of the exercise components is not intensity, it's not duration, it's frequency. The more often the body gets moved, the better off you are. Now, I would say just because we have some stair climbers in here, and there's a lot of underlying arthritis. My preference, if you are someone to take the stairs, which I would highly encourage you, is stairs are only for going up. It's better for your leg, it's better for your cardiovascular. Going down from an aerobic standpoint is not that beneficial. It's obviously got gravity in your favor. If you take a tumble, unfortunately you have gravity going against you in that case. And if you look at loading on the joints, particularly in the knees, going downhill provides a lot of additional loading onto the knees, which if you have underlying arthritis in the knees, it's not good. So my preference is, if you're going to take the stairs, up only, elevator down. Sounds a little counterintuitive, but it's better for your body that way, and less risky as well. So walking is sufficient. Frequency is very important. Now, I don't want to minimize the wellness center. In an ideal world, you would have aerobic, that is sort of the walking regularly or swimming or whatever the activity is in terms of getting the heart rate up. Then you would have some muscular strength training. And the strength training, again, it's modest. Now, there's some interesting studies that were done a long time ago so they recruited people over the age of 90 who lived in nursing homes who were very sedentary. And in this case, they did muscle biopsies on these folks. I mean, these were quite the volunteers before they started any exercise program, and then they put them through an exercise program and did muscle biopsies again. What's interesting about 90-year-olds who live in nursing homes, so these are functionally impaired, right? They need help with their activities of daily living. When you look at their muscle biopsies, their muscles look like those of marathon runners after a race. They're all ragged, they're disorganized, they do not look good. And again, for sedentary people, their muscle fiber size is small. Now, this particular researcher took these people and put them through a very vigorous exercise program where for the legs and the arms and that, they had to so first everyone got tested as like, what's the maximum amount of weight you can leg press or bench press and that kind of thing. And they would do exercises at 80 to 90% of what's called 1 rep max. That's really difficult. That is not easy. But evidently you can get these people sort of trained up. So needless to say, at the end of 3 months, these people are all stronger. They have a little bit more function. What's interesting though is when you look at their muscle fibers under biopsy, they look a lot younger now. So they're bigger, they're not as ragged, they're not as disorganized. So clearly there's benefit to the musculature from resistance weight training. And then the third component is I would sort of lump together as balance and flexibility. Those are things that tend to be neglected, particularly for our men. We don't want to focus on balance and flexibility, but those are important. Balance in particular. So as you get older, you tend to have poor balance. And those of you from the sort of 75 on up is when most of those changes start becoming evident. And you will not improve your balance with a walk a day, and you will not improve your balance by going to the gym and lifting weights. There are only 2 types of exercise that have been shown over and over and over to improve balance and actually reduce falling that don't need any more study. And who knows what those are? I think some of you do. But what are they? Not water aerobics. Water aerobics are good, cardiovascular system. But what are the 2 things to improve balance and reduce falls? One starts with a Y, yoga, which I want all of you to go back and tell Denise we need yoga to restart, and the other one is Tai Chi. The reason being both those types of exercises take you sort of to your edge of your balance or edge of comfort and then back, and it does it in a slow, repetitive manner. So I was involved in an exercise study, long time ago, called Mr. Fit. And we had all these centers all over the country doing weight training. Ours was aerobic exercise. We would dunk people in the tank to measure their weight underwater to get body fat estimates and all that. So we had strength training, weight training. There was one oddball group that wanted to do Tai Chi, and they did Tai Chi. And the outcomes were falls, physical function, endurance, that kind of thing. So needless to say, the strength training people got stronger. The aerobic training people were more cardiovascularly fit. But if you looked at falls, none of the groups had any reduction in falls except for the group that did Tai Chi. They were in the Northeast, in Boston somewhere. So they demonstrated that Tai Chi reduced falls. And again, the same is true for yoga. Yoga, for someone who's only done it once or twice, and I would probably say for most of the men here, it looks like it'd be sort of boring. It's very slow, but it's hard. It is good because it works on flexibility as well, but it definitely improves balance. So yoga tends to be something that generally more often females and males go to, but I would want to encourage the men to go as well because there's benefit. Anything else to say about fitness? Move the body. The more frequent, so 5 or 6 times a week in terms of physical activity is ideal. If you miss a day, it's not the end of the world. And the thing too is obviously listen to your body. If you're getting sore or achy, or particularly if you're having chest pain or shortness of breath, come see me. Because your body shouldn't be doing that. You can get tired, that's normal. Having fatigue is normal, particularly if you're not in really good shape. So last part, I'll take a question, I'll do one last piece on this.
Chair yoga here several times, is that okay?
So the question is, chair yoga okay? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Obviously, the more difficult it is, the better. So here's the last exercise thing, which is kind of interesting because we have lots of folks with chronic heart conditions and bad hearts. So in this particular study, they recruited people with chronic congestive heart failure that was severe. And they measured the pump function, which was, in all these folks, that was part of the entry criteria, it had to be terrible. So the normal pump function is something called ejection fraction, 65% plus or minus 5 is normal. These people had 30% or less ejection fractions. These are folks who brushing their teeth would get short of breath, getting dressed would take a half hour, couldn't climb a flight of stairs. They were just very, very limited. They were sort of what people used to call cardiac cripples. So their cardiovascular system just wouldn't let them do anything. So they were recruited into exercise program. Half the group, randomly, you're just going to get a talking to about how to manage your heart failure and why exercise is good, but there wasn't an actual formal exercise training program. The other group had an exercise training program, starting with whatever they could do. Now, no big surprise, if you take people with chronic heart failure and you start exercising them, some of them get worse. They need more diuretic, they retain more fluid. But at the end of the study, the exercise group had much more endurance. Some of these folks who couldn't climb the stairs could climb 2 flights of stairs. They could now brush their teeth, get dressed, and all that. So here's the question. When they looked at the heart pump function again in these people who had terrible hearts, but they've now been subjected to several months of exercise, and they can walk faster, do better, more capacity for physical activity, how much better did the heart pump function get? A little bit, a lot, or no change? A lot better? How many say a lot better? How many say just a little better? How many say no change at all? The no change people are the right ones. No change in heart function at all. But, so cardiovascular fitness is just, it's not only your heart, it's your whole body and your musculature. So it turns out what you're doing is you're training your muscles to do more work with the same amount of blood supply. Kind of amazing, but it's neat. So even heart failure people should have physical activity. Okay, are we still okay on time? Or am I rambling too much?
No, we're good, but I have one question that a resident asked is
Yeah.
about arthritis. Exercising when you're
Yes.
sore and
Yeah, so exercise and arthritis. So arthritis is super common, of course. And degenerative arthritis, the simple version is the cartilage gets worn down, eventually you get bone on bone. Degenerative arthritis is a really complicated process. It's not just degeneration of the joints. The nerves around the joints get affected and don't work as well. So they're not telling your spine and your brain as accurately what the joint angle is and where it is in space. That's not as good. And then the other thing that happens is the muscles above and below the affected joint aren't working as well and get weaker. So part of the treatment for degenerative arthritis is physical therapy, strengthening the joints. Because when you strengthen the muscles around the joint, you improve the alignment and you reduce some of the decay that occurs in the joint. But also, even for folks with advanced arthritis, if you can move the body, it's beneficial. Now, are you going to accelerate the wear, I think is the question. And it's within reason. So we're not talking about running marathons or ultramarathons or 100-mile bike rides. We're talking about within reason for the types of things that you would do. You will not accelerate the joint wear. But you'll find is you tend to have less stiffness, you have a little bit more mobility, and in general, with activity, arthritis pain will go down. It's probably the equivalent of maybe taking some regular acetaminophen or Tylenol around the clock. So it's not huge, but it's significant. So even if you have arthritis, we want you to maintain activity. Now, that's another situation where your body's going to tell you what's okay. Because at some point, you're going to flare up and the joints will be more sore. Or the next day, they might be more sore. So you want to balance that. Okay. Should I move on to topic number 3? Yeah, of course.
I'm sorry.
You're doing fine.
But how does the chiropractic study and work with people like with the Ironmen and us? How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about chiropractors?
Yeah.
Now, as a traditionally trained physician, i.e. you have a problem and I have a pill, so number one is if you have a chiropractor that you like and has been effective for you, I'd suggest you continue. Now, I would love to have 2 or 3 chiropractors that I know many of you like that I could refer to, because I do think it's certainly very beneficial for some folks. I'm not super keen on chiropractic for necks, just because it's a little bit sensitive. And in older adults with advanced arthritis, you can have some trouble. But for a lot of other things, I think chiropractors provide real benefit. And again, if the risk is low and there's potential benefit, why wouldn't we want to try that? So, chiropractors are very much into alignment and symmetry and getting things straightened out. I'm okay with that. I think if you have someone that you like and are comfortable with, I would use that person. Similarly, I've referred people for acupuncture as well. In certain circumstances where you have a chronic aches or pains, or a situation where throwing another pill is not going to likely lead to much benefit, I would consider again, and I think this is always on the preference of the patient. If the patient is agreeable and wants to give it a shot, the risk is nil. The biggest risk really with chiropractic and acupuncture is the cost, because generally it's not covered by insurance. But the risk of harm is low. So if there's benefit, why not? And the worst case, generally for those kind of situations or other alternative therapies, is if it doesn't work, you've lost a few dollars, but you tried something that might be beneficial. And I've had people benefit from both chiropractic as well as acupuncture. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last topic before we go to Q&A, which are vitamins and supplements, which is another tricky one because you are all getting bombarded with advertisements for memory supplements and joint supplements and gastrointestinal friendly bacteria supplements and bone health supplements, eye supplements. Now, the AREDS is sort of a different story because there's actually good data for macular degeneration. But for most of the other stuff, and I would tell you, so a long time ago, I was one of those people who took big dose everything. So, gosh, how much? I used to take vitamin C like 8 or 9 grams a day, which is huge. Now, I trained at the University of Washington, and my mom was sort of a little granola, so we did vitamins at home. And then this Linus Pauling, the vitamin C guru, came and talked. And it was interesting. His whole argument was, if you look at goats, roughly the same weight and mass as humans, goats evidently produce their own vitamin C. And a 140-pound goat will produce something like 14 or 15 grams of vitamin C a day. And his whole argument was, well, if the goat is doing that, but we don't make our own, we have to get it from our diet, wouldn't it be reasonable to take a whole bunch of vitamin C to improve your immune function, improve wound healing, et cetera, et cetera? So the problem is, in the absence of deficiency, it didn't look like it really did much. Linus Pauling, I think, lived into his early 90s. So he didn't have exceptional longevity. He took high-dose vitamin C for a long, long time. And then I used to take a whole bunch of B vitamins too. No. So the downside for vitamin C was always, you take too much vitamin C, you're going to get calcium oxalate stones or other kidney stones. Turns out that's probably not true. So the downside was you're going to spend money on vitamin C, but the benefit was sort of marginal. So here's let me go from an evidence-based, and this won't apply to you. If you're a nursing home resident and you have some chronic comorbidities, a multiple vitamin reduces incidence of cold and flu by something like 15 to 20%. So multiple vitamin once daily for a nursing home resident, there's data that actually provides some benefit. Now, a lot of those folks, they don't eat very well, or they'll eat fine for a week and then the next 2 weeks they're kind of marginal. So those people benefit from a vitamin. For all of you walkie-talkies, in general, we don't have any data about vitamins and supplements. It doesn't look like it necessarily provides benefit, but it's a gigantic, huge industry. Now, and I'm not necessarily here to discourage you from taking vitamins. There are some supplements where there's getting to be some data. Now, the vitamins that are, Prevagen and these other memory enhancers, all you'll see on those advertisements are the testimonials. But there is so where's the research coming from? So there are two groups of sort of physician PhD researchers. So there are the aging geriatric folks like myself, and then this other pretty well-funded group are the anti-aging people, the people who say we can stop aging, that it should be possible not to reverse aging, that's going to come later, right? But that there might be some way in which you could slow down this whole metabolic metabolism so that you wouldn't age as rapidly. And there's some interesting stuff coming out of there. So I'll tell you to simplify. Number one, it's not about refilling your body if you're a male with testosterone or if you're a female with estrogen, sort of what I call the empty tank theory, which is if as you get older your estrogen levels drop or your testosterone levels drop, well, it's simple enough. We can restore those back to youthful levels. But it turns out that's probably not a good thing. We know it's not a good thing for women because there's just slightly increased risk of thrombosis, stroke, heart attacks, less osteoporosis. But the net balance from the Women's Health Initiative was estrogen replacement therapy in otherwise healthy women is not worthwhile. And similarly in men, it's taken longer, but testosterone replacement doesn't look like it. So the harm side is also small, but the benefit side is tiny. So is it worth doing that? So as your hormone levels go down, should we refill them? The answer to that is probably no. But there are some circumstances with supplements related to cellular energy development and immune response and inflammatory markers that might be worth considering. I think it's a little bit early, but I still think in the course of your lifetimes there are going to be some supplements that might be worthwhile as it relates to memory, believe it or not, but as well as some component of immune function and cellular activity. I know that's sort of vague and non-specific, but if you were to ask me, should I take a B vitamin, should I take a C vitamin, Should I take zinc? Should I take calcium? So the calcium data is interesting too. So if you're a female and you're over 65, particularly if you have osteoporosis, you should be on calcium supplement, right? The benefit of that, so if you had the choice between eating cheese or taking calcium supplement, you want to eat the cheese. It's superior, no question. Calcium supplements look like they're pretty effective at calcifying your blood vessels. That's not most of the problem if you have osteoporosis. The marginal benefit of increasing bone mineral density for calcium alone is nil. Calcium plus D a little bit, but it's not very potent. But in general, if you're on osteoporosis medicine, you should be on a calcium plus D supplement. And maybe calcium plus D plus, what's the other one? Tasty, there's a third component. Natalie, do you remember what is the other? There's,
Prevagen for you.
yeah, I need some Prevagen. It's, vitamin K2. Vitamin K2 is something that's involved with blood clotting, but also it has a role in bone health too. So in an ideal world, you'd have your calcium plus vitamin D plus vitamin K2 supplement. That might be the best. But we don't have long study data about that. So that is sort of a rambling, semi-incoherent review of some things to think about as it relates to health and well-being. I didn't talk at all about social interaction, but as many of you discovered, being a hermit in your apartment is not good for your brain. It's not good for anyone's brain. And social connections and connectedness might be as important or more important than all the things I just talked about, because you've lived through it. And unfortunately, we've seen the consequences of that too. Being open and engaged, talking to friends. I don't think the iPad or the telephone is a good substitute for that. I think it's really about going out, doing things, and engaging with people. If you look at the longest lived cultures and societies around the world, there is quite a strong sense of community, quite a strong sense of respect for elders, which I wish in America we had a little bit more of. But the social connectedness, spirituality, are all also important components. So not to neglect that. It really is, you really want to have the whole package, right? You can't just say, well, I'm going to do the good diet thing and neglect the others. So I'm going to stop there. We'll have sort of open questions, stump the chump, open forum questions, and we'll see how it goes.
Can you talk about sleep a little bit? My own internal clock is kind of a mess.
Yeah, can I talk about sleep? Oh, that's a tough one. Sleep. So sleep is important. It gets disturbed as you get older. So when you are young, as a teenager, so let me back up a little bit. Sleep it's not just sleep awake, it's sleep and stages of sleep and what's happening in those sleep cycles. So REM sleep is what's considered the dream sleep. You're sort of at a superficial level of sleep, but that's where you have the dreams. Stage 4 sleep is the very deep sleep. Some racket happens outside, you don't hear a thing. If you look at brain waves, they're all very slow. That's the restful sleep that everyone needs to feel sort of refreshed in the morning. So as you get older, unfortunately what happens is what's called your sleep architecture gets disturbed. And you have, even for the same amount of sleep, you have more superficial lower stage sleep and less of the deep restorative sleep. I don't have an answer for that. It's challenging. In general, it's best to have a routine prior to going to bed, which means probably not too much TV, certainly not the news. Things that are not very stimulating, no alcohol before bed, no arguments before bed. Have a routine, go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time. It's certainly not about having your doctor giving you a prescription for Ambien. Because the thing too is for all the over-the-counter and including the prescription sleepers, they tend to give you more total sleep, there's no question, but it tends to be more of the superficial sleep. It's not as much of the deep sleep. So you've heard these crazy stories of people getting up at night, not being aware, going for a drive or going outside for a walk, somehow making it back and not remembering anything, but people have seen them out and about. So we don't like the prescription sleepers. Short term, they're okay. Long term, don't like them. That's a whole seminar, unfortunately. We like melatonin. That's what your brain produces to help with sleep. For our folks, we find that in general, 1, 3, and 5 milligrams does tiddlywinks. It doesn't work. Most of our folks, if they're going to have a benefit from melatonin, are taking 10, 12, or 15 milligrams at bedtime. Melatonin is a little bit more helpful for falling asleep. It's not super good for keeping you asleep. If you have trouble waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, then maybe try the extended release melatonin. And if you end up taking too much melatonin, you might be groggy in the morning. It's not so bad. Other questions? How much sleep? Everyone's different. We have some people who, they sleep like teenagers. They're in bed 10, 12 hours a day at night, and then they'll take a nap. I think that's probably too much. The rule of thumb is 8 hours, but I don't think there's any magic number. I think it's more related to the amount of time that you slept as a younger person. Can you still maintain that? Now, the thing we know for a fact that as people get older, they tend to sleep less. If you used to be an 8-hour sleeper, when you get in your 70s and 80s, you're a 7 or a 6 or a 5.5-hour sleeper. You're not an 8-hour sleeper anymore. Don't know why that happens, but it just does. Yeah?
Cover the importance of staying hydrated. Our age and is
Water is still the best.
Oh, you guys, it's like I planted these questions. So the question is what about water and hydration? So number one, what happens to many people as they get older is the thirst mechanism does not work worth beans. It's terrible. We have people who could go all day without drinking and they wouldn't be thirsty at all. So if you're one of those people, be careful. In general, and for my women in particular, tend not to drink that much water. Why? Because, quote, I don't want to run to the bathroom all the time. Your bladder gets smaller as you get older, and it doesn't want to hold as much as it used to. So there's more running to the bathroom. But that's not a good trade-off if you get sick or you don't drink, or with this kind of heat, you're outside and you're losing more water through your skin and perspiration and other things. Now, so what's the rule of thumb? I don't have a rule of thumb for how many glasses to drink. If you've got reasonably good vision, I would say go by what your body tells you. And the way you do that is after you pee in the toilet, you take a look and see what the color is. If your urine is pale or if it's clear, you've got plenty of water on board. If it's dark yellow, right then and there, you need to drink more because your kidneys are conserving water. More of the concentrated stuff that the kidney is getting rid of in terms of metabolites and that are getting concentrated. There's not as much water to dilute it, so you get more yellow urine. So if you have yellow urine, you're not drinking enough. I think that's the easiest way to sort of handle that, as opposed to saying everyone should drink 6 to 8-ounce glasses per day. For some people, that's too much. And if you have cardiac conditions, it might be sort of borderline. So I would say go based on what your body's telling you. Now, that's in the absence. If you're someone who takes a water pill, a diuretic like Lasix or Bumex or something like that in the morning, that's going to, by default, give you dilute urine, so you can't go by that. But later in the day, when it's worn off, you can then still have the kidneys doing what they're supposed to do and go by that. But good question. Yeah?
what about leg cramps that wake you up when you're sleeping so beautifully soundly?
So this is the stump the chump part. What about leg cramps? Those are tough. There's no good explanation for why some people get those and others don't. So sort of the old, I don't know if it's medical or wives' tales, is, maybe you should try a calcium supplement, maybe you should try magnesium supplement, maybe you should try a potassium supplement. In my experience, that almost never works. it's worth a try. It's low risk. Someone else told me there's some southern remedy where you put a bar of soap in a sock. Anyone heard that? Yeah. Okay, so here's a testimonial. A bar of soap in a sock works.
What kind of soap?
Probably something really expensive. I don't know. Now, if you don't drink enough and your volume is lowish, you might have a higher risk of developing cramps. Because certainly athletes who get volume depleted more likely have muscular cramps. I don't know if it's the same mechanism in older adults. There's some homeopathic remedies and there's some topical remedies. I'd say it's worth a try, but I don't have a good answer for that. It's a really common problem. I definitely wouldn't want to take like an anticonvulsant or a muscle relaxant or anything like that. That would be not a good idea.
But they also say you shouldn't take quinine, and that's not the only thing that stops it.
Yeah, I have some people in whom that was their remedy. That's really hard to get now, unless you go to Canada or Mexico.
Could
I think.
make a comment about the leg cramps?
Yes, please.
I find that I get them when I don't drink enough.
Mm-hmm.
And when I get them now, and it's not every day, but 2 or 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Not the real bad ones, but in the morning before I get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been drinking all
Yeah.
night long. I told you in the day.
Drinking what?
Water. With wine at dinner or over the phone.
Yeah.
But and one time
Sure.
it was so bad they wouldn't go away, and I was at a meeting.
Oh, that's no fun. Yeah. So water, again, so that's sort of step one, but unfortunately doesn't work all the time.
But sometimes you get.
Banana is the
water on
potassium
your
supplement.
legs.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Told me once when I inquired about muscle cramps, he said just take a tablespoon of mustard, hot dog mustard, before you go to bed, and I must say it really helps.
Yeah, okay.
And mustard,
So we got the bar soap, we got the drinking, we got a tablespoon of mustard. How about the teaspoon of cinnamon? And then you can post yourself on YouTube. All right. Are we okay with, so someone made a comment that, what about a banana? Banana is rich in potassium. That would be the potassium supplement. Go ahead. Tonic water. Yeah, tonic water is sort of the quinine substitute. So tablets used to be available. You can still get, you have to look at the label. I don't know that all of them have quinine in them. Some of them still do. It's a really low percent. But it's one of those worth a try, right?
Other questions? We have the answers we all needed.
Oh boy, I don't know about that.
Dr. Hirth, I wanted to ask, again, a couple residents have left me questions because they weren't able to be here. The effect of vision and hearing issues is pretty significant.
Oh boy, yeah.
And sometimes a particular resident felt like did not address it soon enough. Do you see is that as being problematic?
So the question is, what about vision and hearing? I mean, those are two super critical senses that if they're impaired, makes everything more difficult, right? What am I supposed to say? I mean, so let's just...
Is it problematic that we should address it sooner maybe than we do as Americans or humans or...
Yeah, so as it relates to vision, so in general, your regular doctor isn't going to do a vision screening or vision assessment. I think for all of you here, it's reasonable that you each should have a good ophthalmologic examination once a year. As you get older, the two most common diseases that are affecting your eyes are something called macular degeneration, which is degeneration of the central part of the retina that's responsible for very fine detailed vision. So if you start having macular degeneration, you lose your central very high acuity vision. The other one is called glaucoma, which is a combination of increased eye pressure, and that eye pressure is sufficient to affect your retina. Glaucoma manifests as loss of peripheral vision. Most of us don't really pay that much attention to what we see here at the very edge. So that's where you go into the big dome, they shine the lights, and you're supposed to click the button or raise your finger if you see the light here and there. That's a screening for glaucoma plus a pressure test. Those two increase in frequency with aging. There's treatment for both, so you would want to identify and correct those as soon as possible. Hearing loss is another can of worms, right? It's super common. As you get older, you already know this, everything gets stiffer. And the other thing that gets stiffer is your eardrum and the bones attached to the eardrum that vibrate and transmit sound to your brain. So people tend to lose high frequency first and then lower frequency later on. In general, male voices can be heard okay. Female voices are a little bit more difficult because of higher frequency. Hearing aids are sort of the fix for that, but they're not terribly satisfactory, are they? Because they tend to amplify everything. And hearing loss is not just the loss of transmission through the ear to the brain. There's some change that occurs inside the brain that affects the ability to interpret, understand. So the language processing also doesn't work as well. So you can imagine just putting an amplifier in there doesn't necessarily fix a problem. The other challenge you have, I would say, for hearing aids in particular is if you're not careful, there's no audiologists in the audience here, that can be a huge racket, right? I mean, we have people paying $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 for hearing aids. Now they come with the little remotes. You're listening to something you don't care to hear, you can mute your friend. But the sort of the computer circuitry, I don't know, it's gotten all that much better. I would say it's in the last couple of years, there have been some lower cost alternatives that have been really quite effective for our folks. And Costco is one, and what's the other big retailer that's selling hearing aids that are not exorbitant? Sam's Club, yeah. So it's possible to get actually pretty respectable hearing aids fitted by an audiologist for, I think, a few hundred to like maybe $1,200 as opposed to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. I think that would be definitely worth exploring. Hearing, again, it's a challenging problem. If we had to do this still for, you can hear me okay, but I'll start mumbling, then you won't understand a thing. And then you put your mask on too, and then no one knows anything, and we don't have any nonverbal communication, which is obviously part and parcel of us talking to each other. Okay, any
more questions? One more.
Mr. Holmes? Maybe two.
Is there supplements for the eye?
So the question is, are there supplements for the eye? So
That we should be taking early to kind of prevent.
so she added a twist. So question number one was, are there supplements for the eye? Answer, yes. Question number two is that we should be taking early in anticipation or prevention of eye disease. That's not known. So the AREDS 2 is this Bausch & Lomb multivitamin product. It's interesting. So you might have heard for COVID prevention, you should take high dose zinc, like 50, 60, 70 milligrams of zinc. The AREDS, if you take one capsule twice a day as it's on the label, that's 80 milligrams of zinc right there. Apparently zinc is good for the retina, and there's vitamin A and other components in the AREDS. The data is all about people with early disease to slow the progression. In terms of prevention, I don't think we know anything.
So you don't suggest taking it so that we don't get it?
I wish I could, but I don't know. And out of a supplement, AREDS is a little bit expensive. It's not a cheapy supplement. One last question, and
What about
here.
fish oil and all those omegas?
Oh, yeah. What about fish oil and omega-3s and all that? So omega-3s were thought to be beneficial with underlying heart or cardiovascular disease. Stephanie's doing a really good job keeping up with me because I'm still moving around quite a bit. So the data on that is really weak, if at all. So number one, fish oils are very easily oxidized. What's that mean? The fish comes into your processing plant, it gets taken apart, squeezed, pureed, whatever they do to get the omega-3s out of it. As it's exposed to oxygen in our environment, a lot of the omega-3s get oxidized. And it turns out those kind of supplements are no good at all because part of what the fish oil is supposed to be an antioxidant. Well, if it's already being oxidized in the air before it gets into your body, it's not going to do anything. So there are some omega-3s that are prepared in a nitrogen environment and the fish is all processed with no oxygen, all that. But even that particular better supplement hasn't been shown to prevent future cardiac and stroke events in people with underlying cardiovascular disease. And I don't remember, so there's a recent study again looking at fish oils, and there was this teeny weeny little potential harm from it that they identified. I don't remember what the harm was, but net, it doesn't look like those necessarily do anything. There is the sort of this omega-3 supplement, which is a highly refined icosapentaenoic acid or something like that. So it's not the whole spectrum of omega-3s, because there are literally dozens of those. It's one concentrated one. And in people with underlying heart disease, it looks like it reduces heart attack. But it's super expensive. It's prescription only. I think it's sort of for those, you're on a statin and you're still having trouble, you might consider that. But in general, unless you like smelling like salmon or fish as you're walking around, probably not too much benefit. Okay. Are we good? My pleasure.